My husband called me while I was at my mother's surgery, his voice shaking. I need to tell you something before you see the news. I rushed out, heart pounding, only to find. I still remember the smell of the hospital that morning. Antiseptic mixed with something heavier, like metal and stale air. A smell that made my stomach churn. I'd been sitting in the waiting area for nearly 4 hours, staring at the same spot on the ugly beige floor, trying not to let my mind wander into dark places. My mother was in surgery, a serious one, and no matter how many times I reassured myself that she'd be fine, that modern medicine was incredible, that the doctors knew what they were doing, I couldn't shake the gnawing fear sitting in my chest. I was alone in the waiting room, cradling a cheap hospital coffee in my hands, though I hadn't taken more than a sip. The cup was cold now. The plastic chair beneath me felt like it had molded into my spine. I shifted, stretched my neck, exhaled slowly. Then my phone buzzed on my lap. I glanced down at the screen and saw Aaron's name. My husband. At first, I hesitated. We had spoken briefly earlier that morning, just a quick exchange before I left for the hospital. He had been distracted, distant, but I figured he was just stressed from work. Lately, it seemed like everything put him on edge. Still, something about the timing unsettled me. I swiped to answer. Hey. His voice was strange, tight, shaky. Julia. Immediately, my pulse picked up. Aaron, what's wrong? Where are you? I frowned. Where do you think? I'm at the hospital. Mom's still in surgery. He exhaled sharply. It almost sounded like he was struggling to breathe. Listen, I need to tell you something before you see the news. My stomach dropped. What news? There was a pause, a long, excruciating one, and then he said, just come outside. Now. Aaron, just tell me. Please, Julia. His voice cracked. I don't want you to hear about this from someone else. My whole body tensed. Something was very, very wrong. I shot up from my seat, ignoring the way my legs wobbled beneath me, and hurried toward the exit. My heart was hammering against my ribs as I pushed through the hospital's double doors and stepped out into the brisk Chicago morning. Aaron was already there. He was standing beside his car in the parking lot, gripping his phone so tightly that his knuckles were white. When he saw me, his face twisted into something unreadable. Guilt? Fear? Then my phone vibrated in my hand. I looked down. A news notification. I clicked it instinctively, and the second I saw the headline, my breath caught in my throat. Prominent Chicago businessman found dead in Lake Michigan, suspected foul play. Daniel Whitmore. My boss. I swayed on my feet. A rush of noise filled my ears, like static. Aaron took a small step toward me. Julia. I barely heard him. My fingers were shaking as I scrolled through the article, eyes skimming the words, catching fragments. Last seen late last night. Body recovered early this morning near the Navy Pier. Sources say he suffered blunt force trauma before entering the water. I lifted my gaze to Aaron, my vision blurring. My boss is dead. He swallowed. My pulse was in my throat now. Why did you call me out here? What does this have to do with you? Aaron opened his mouth, but before he could speak, a voice cut through the air. Mr. Caldwell? We both turned. 2 police officers stood a few feet away, their expressions unreadable, their presence suffocating. Aaron stiffened. Sir, one of them said, stepping forward. We need you to come with us for questioning regarding the death of Daniel Whitmore. The ground beneath me tilted. I turned to my husband, expecting what? A denial? A look of shock. But his face had gone completely blank. Aaron. My voice was barely above a whisper. He hesitated, then slowly lifted his hands, palms out, like he knew this moment was coming. I didn't KLL him, he murmured. But the way he said it, it didn't sound like a man who was innocent. It sounded like a man who knew he was screwed. And suddenly, I wasn't sure if I knew the man I had married at all. I didn't sleep that night. After Aaron was taken to the station, I had spent hours at the hospital, mechanically nodding along as the surgeon told me my mother had made it through the procedure. I should have been relieved, should have been grateful, but I felt nothing except numbness. When I finally got home, my entire body was exhausted, but my mind was spinning too fast to rest. The house felt different, like it didn't belong to me anymore. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the clock on the stove, trying to piece together how the HLL this had happened. Aaron was being questioned for murder. The police hadn't arrested him, hadn't charged him, but the implication was there. And then there was what he had said before the cops showed up. I need to tell you something before you see the news. My hands curled into fists. What had he meant by that? What was he going to tell me? And then there was the other thing. The accusation. Because I found out he was sleeping with my wife. Even now, hours later, I couldn't process those words. They weren't real. They didn't belong to me. Because it wasn't true. I had never slept with Daniel Whitmore. So why the HLL did my husband think I had? I squeezed my eyes shut, taking a slow breath. My head was pounding. I needed answers. And if Aaron wouldn't give them to me, I would find them myself. The next morning, I was sitting outside the police station in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my fingers ached. I had debated whether or not to come here. Part of me was afraid of what I'd find out. But the other part? The other part was furious. Aaron had thrown a BMB into my life, and I wasn't just going to sit back and let everything burn without knowing why. I pushed open the car door and stepped out, the cold morning air biting at my skin. My heart was hammering as I walked up the steps, into the station, and up to the front desk. The officer behind the counter barely looked up. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to see my husband." My voice was steady. "Aaron Caldwell." The officer typed something into the computer. Then he glanced at me, expression neutral. "He's still being questioned. I need to see him." He sighed. "I'm not sure if." Before he could finish, another voice cut in from behind me. "She can see him." I turned. A man stood there, tall, mid-40s, wearing a suit that looked expensive but slightly rumpled. "Detective," I realized. He gave me a slow, measured look. "Julia Caldwell, right?" I nodded. He gestured for me to follow him. "Come on, let's talk." I hesitated, then walked after him. And even though I didn't know it then, I was about to learn something that would change everything. I followed the detective down a narrow hallway, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. The station smelled like burnt coffee and something stale, like old sweat. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered slightly, casting a sickly glow over the gray walls. I could feel the detective watching me from the corner of his eye. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with salt and pepper hair and a face that looked like it had seen its fair share of lies. His badge read Detective Marcus Holden. "You look like HLL," he said, pushing open a heavy door and gesturing for me to step inside. I let out a short, humorless laugh. "Yeah, well, my husband just got dragged in for questioning about my boss's murder, so forgive me if I don't look my best." He smirked slightly, but didn't say anything. Instead, he closed the door behind us and took a seat across from me at the small metal table. The room was cold, sterile, just like you'd imagine a police interrogation room to be. I rubbed my arms, trying to shake the chill. "Where's Aaron?" Holden leaned back, studying me. "Still talking to my guys. We haven't charged him with anything, if that's what you're worried about." I swallowed hard. "So why am I here?" Holden tapped his fingers against the table. "Because I think you might be able to help us." I narrowed my eyes. "Help you? How?" He sighed, tilting his head slightly. "Let's start simple. How long have you and Aaron been married?" 7 years. "And how would you describe your relationship?" I hesitated. It was such a simple question, but suddenly, it felt impossible to answer. How would I describe it? 7 years ago, I would have said we were solid. That Aaron was my best friend, my person. The kind of man who remembered my coffee order without asking, who kissed my forehead in the mornings before leaving for work, who held me when I cried. But now I wasn't sure. "It's been complicated lately," I admitted, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. Holden nodded like he had expected that. "Complicated how?" I hesitated again. Should I tell him? About the late nights, the weird distance, the way Aaron had been acting like a stranger for the last few months? I glanced down at my hands. He's been different. Distant. I thought it was work stress, but I trailed off, shaking my head. "But," Holden prompted. "But now I don't know what to think." I met his gaze. "Because last night, before the police showed up, he told me something." Holden didn't blink. "What did he tell you?" I took a deep breath. "He said that Daniel Whitmore was sleeping with me." For the first time, Holden's expression changed. His eyebrows lifted slightly. "And was he?" My face flushed hot with anger. "No, absolutely not." Holden studied me for a long moment, like he was trying to decide if I was lying. I clenched my fists. "I don't know why Aaron thinks that. But I swear to you, I never had an affair with Daniel Whitmore. I barely even spoke to him outside of work. He was my boss, that's it." Holden leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Did Whitmore ever give you any reason to believe he was interested in you?" I frowned. "No. I mean, he was charming, but he was like that with everyone. He had power, money, influence. He knew how to make people like him. But he never made a move on me." Holden nodded slowly, processing. Then he tapped his fingers against the table again. "Your husband seems pretty convinced. Any idea why?" I exhaled sharply. "No. But he mentioned something about seeing messages. I don't know what the HLL he's talking about." Holden tilted his head. "Messages?" "Yeah. He said he saw messages between me and Daniel." I shook my head. "But that doesn't make sense. Because I never texted him. Ever." Holden's lips pressed into a thin line. He looked like he was putting a puzzle together in his head. Then he stood abruptly. "Stay here." "What? Why?" He didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving me sitting there, confused and boiling with frustration. I don't know how much time passed before the door opened again. It felt like forever. Aaron walked in. The sight of him sent a jolt through my body. He looked bad. His dark hair was a mess, his shirt was wrinkled, and his eyes were bloodshot like he hadn't slept in days. His face was pale, drawn. But the worst part? He wouldn't look at me. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. "Aaron." He exhaled through his nose, running a hand through his hair. "Julia." I crossed my arms. "What the HLL is going on?" His jaw tightened. "I don't know." I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "You don't know? You dragged me out of the hospital, Told me my boss was screwing me, and now you're sitting in a police station for his murder, and you don't know? Aaron winced like my words physically hurt him. Julia, I don't know how to explain this. I stepped closer. Then try. He finally met my eyes. And what I saw there scared the HLL out of me. Regret. Fear. Guilt. Aaron, I whispered, my throat tight. Tell me you didn't do this. He swallowed hard. I didn't. But you were there, weren't you? My voice cracked. A long silence stretched between us. Then, finally, he nodded. I felt like the air had been knocked out of my lungs. Jesus Christ, Aaron. He ran a hand over his face. I met with him last night. We argued. That's it. I didn't. He broke off, shaking his head. I didn't KLL him, Julia. I wanted to believe him. But the problem was, I wasn't sure if I did. I turned away, pressing my fingers to my temples. Why did you even go see him? Aaron let out a slow breath. Because of the messages. I froze. The ones you saw? I asked carefully. He nodded. I found them a few weeks ago. Texts. Between you and Whitmore. I turned back around. Aaron, I never texted him. His eyes darkened. Then explain this. He pulled out his phone and swiped at the screen before handing it to me. I took it, my hand shaking slightly. And then I looked down at the messages. They were real. Conversations between my number and Daniel Whitmore's. Flirty, suggestive, explicit. My blood ran cold. I felt sick. Because there was only one problem. I had never written those texts. And if I hadn't sent them, someone else had. I slowly lifted my gaze to Aaron, my heart hammering in my chest. Something was very, very wrong. And this was only the beginning. I stared at the phone screen, my breath coming in shallow, panicked gasps. The messages were right there, plain as day. They made it seem like I had been carrying on a secret FIR with Daniel Whitmore. But I hadn't. I had never sent those texts. Which meant someone had faked them. Aaron, I whispered, my throat dry. You have to believe me. I didn't write these. He let out a bitter laugh. Julia, I'm looking at them. I shoved the phone back at him, frustration bubbling up in my chest. Then explain to me how they're on your phone, but not on mine. He hesitated. His brows knit together, and I could see the flicker of doubt cross his face. Check my phone, I said. Right now. He fumbled for his own phone, swiping hurriedly through my messages. His eyes darted back and forth, scanning. I watched as his face twisted with confusion, then shock. They're not here, he murmured. Exactly, I said. Because I never sent them. Silence hung between us. I could see the gears turning in his mind, the weight of realization settling in. But, he exhaled sharply, shaking his head. Then how the HLL did they get on my phone? It was a good question, and I was starting to have a terrifying suspicion about the answer. It took 2 days before everything started to unravel. Aaron was released without charges. The police didn't have enough to hold him. He admitted to meeting with Daniel the night before he was found dead, but there was no hard evidence linking him to the crime. The detectives were looking at other angles now, but I had the feeling they still weren't convinced of his innocence. And honestly, neither was I. Not yet. I needed proof. And if someone had gone through the trouble of faking an FIR, I had to figure out why. I started with Aaron's phone. If the messages were fake, there had to be a way to trace them. I spent hours researching, trying to understand how text messages could be spoofed, manipulated, or fabricated. And what I found was both horrifying and fascinating. There were programs, software specifically designed to clone phone numbers and send fake messages. All someone needed was access to a phone for a few minutes, and they could create an entire conversation that never actually happened, which meant that someone had set me up. And I had a pretty good idea who. Samantha Langley, Daniel Whitmore's business partner. I had worked under both of them for the past 5 years. Samantha was sharp, ruthless, and ambitious, always standing slightly in Daniel's shadow, even though she clearly hated being there. She had always been cold toward me, but it wasn't until recently that I had started sensing real hostility. And then I remembered something. A few weeks ago, I had accidentally left my phone in the conference room during a late meeting. When I went back to get it, Samantha had been there, alone, looking at something on her own phone. She had glanced up at me, her expression unreadable, and then left without a word. At the time, I hadn't thought anything of it. Now I knew that must have been the moment. She had cloned my phone, and she had used those fake messages to blow up my marriage, throw suspicion on Aaron, and distract everyone from something bigger. I just had to figure out what. I spent the next week digging, and what I found made my stomach twist. Daniel Whitmore had been under investigation, not for an FIR, but for financial fraud. Millions of dollars had gone missing from Whitmore and Langley's accounts, and the feds had been circling. But here was the kicker. They weren't looking at Daniel. They were looking at Samantha. And with him dead, that investigation had stalled. It was a perfect cover-up. Samantha must have found out about the probe and panicked. She knew if the authorities kept looking, they'd find out she had been laundering money for years. But if Daniel died before they could make a case, everything would get tied up in red tape. She needed a distraction, something messy, something that would pull attention away from the real crime. So she created a scene, a fake FIR, a suspiciously timed argument. A husband who already had cracks in his marriage. And just like that, everyone, including the police, was looking in the wrong direction. She had almost gotten away with it. Almost. I knew I couldn't go to the police with just a theory. I needed something real. So I set a trap. I waited until Samantha was in her office late one night, knowing she often stayed after hours. Then I called her from an unknown number, disguising my voice. The police are reopening Daniel's fraud case, I said. They're coming for you next. Then I hung up. And I waited. She took the bait. That night, she logged into a hidden offshore account from her personal laptop, trying to move the remaining stolen funds before the authorities could seize them. What she didn't know? I had already hacked into the security system and recorded everything. The next morning, I turned the evidence over to the feds. By noon, they were arresting her. And just like that, Samantha Langley's empire came crashing down. Aaron and I didn't magically fix everything overnight. There were still wounds, deep ones. But once the truth was out, once he saw how he had been manipulated, he broke down. He apologized. He begged for my forgiveness. And eventually, I gave it. Not because I owed it to him, but because I loved him. And because revenge, as satisfying as it was, meant nothing if I lost myself in the process. In the end, Samantha went to prison. Daniel Whitmore got justice. And I walked away stronger. I wasn't just the woman caught in the middle of a scandal anymore. I was the one who ended it. And damn, did it feel good.
يعني احنا كل سنة بيبقى فيه تطور، بس هو الشكل العام انه بيبقى فيه تنظيم كويس في كل سنة، وهو الجديد المرة دي ان الحياة هي اللي بتغطي المهرجان. وتحية لكل العاملين في الحياة مني ومن فرقتي الموسيقية.
وعايزة انوه لحضرتك كمان انه النهارده الحفلة ترند. حفلة حضرتك يمكن كان في ترند الاول الاستاذ علي الحجار وحضرتك النهارده. فيعني اعتقد ان ده نجاح كبير جدا كمان للمشاهدين اللي بيشوفونا على التلفزيون.
ما كانش ليا حظ ان انا احضر حفلة الاستاذ علي.
أيوة
لكن هتابع بقى بعد كده كل الحاجات.
تابع وتشوف بقى الترند بقى والحاجات. إن شاء الله. سريعا كده اي جديد عند حضرتك بتقدمه الفترة اللي جاية؟
يعني انا